Detective recap here. Today, I'm going to explain an Indonesian thriller film called Marlina the Murderer in 4 Acts. This feminine-centered revenge story evokes the mythical tales of lone cowboys in the Wild West, except it puts women at the forefront of its violent and exciting atmosphere. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. Act 1, The Robbery. A man on a dirt bike weaves through the striking gold and green fields of the island of Sumba. He makes his way to a lone hut in the middle of nowhere. In this place, the nearest neighboring house is miles away, making it the perfect place to commit a crime. The man on the dirt bike is named Marcus, an aged man who is a criminal and a fiend. Marcus enters the hut where a young and beautiful woman named Marlina lives. Upon seeing Marlina, Marcus asks if her husband is home, and she answers that he will be back soon. Marcus immediately knows that she is lying because her husband's corpse is sitting right in the same room they're in. It's unnoticeable at first glance, but from the dark corner, he could be seen sitting while wrapped in a blanket. Marcus must have heard of Marlina's late husband and the beautiful widow he left behind, all with their material possessions. Then Marcus does something that only an evil-hearted man could do. He starts explaining to Marlina the cruel intentions he has for her in a disturbingly calm manner. He will be stealing all of her money and livestock, and soon more men will arrive, and they will violate her as a group. With his twisted mind, he even implies that Marlina would be lucky to have multiple men at the same time. After demanding Marlina to make them dinner, Marcus takes out and plays his prized yunga, a native instrument. Despite his vile promises, Marlina stoically exits the room and braces herself for the upcoming danger. Already, it's evident that Marlina has an unyielding character and an indomitable will. It's easy to fall into panic and even run out screaming with such a bleak situation. Some may even accept their fate and just succumb to others' will. But Marlina is different. She has a fire in her and she has no intentions of going down easy. Later that day, several men come in a truck and another dirt bike. Marlina counts 6 men in total, including Marcus. When the men got off the truck, they ordered a man named Franz to inspect the livestock before loading the animals into their truck. Afterward, 4 of the men go inside the hut's living room area to meet with Marcus. The heartless and disgusting men all discuss how they will violate Marlina as if it were such a trivial thing. Marcus then gets up and leaves his friends to take a nap. While listening to their conversation from the next room, Marlina feels a shiver down her spine as they talk about taking turns with her. Still, the fierce and determined Marlina doesn't give in to the fear, and she resolves to survive the night. She enters the living room to join the thugs, who are sitting near her husband's corpse. Most of them barely have the guts to look her in the eye, knowing the evil intent they carried with them. Marlina feigns courtesy and greets them a good evening before entering her room where Marcus is staying. Marlina sits by the mirror and pretends to comb her hair while retrieving a wrapped item from the drawer without Marcus's notice. Just as Marcus demanded earlier, Marlina begins cooking dinner for them. However, the chicken soup she's making has a special ingredient. The wrapped item she retrieved contains a potent and lethally poisonous fruit, and she mixes it with the soup. Despite the situation they've put her in, the men still expect her to be subservient, both because she's a woman and because they've lived their lives unchallenged. It never crosses their minds that Marlina would have her own agency and have defiant thoughts of her own. They send her off to a task traditionally assigned to women, and the poetic aspect of it all is that she'll be using this to her advantage with the poison in her hands. Suddenly, Franz comes in from the back door and sees her cooking the soup. Marlina then steps on the fruit, concealing its existence from her assailants. With Franz asking for a taste, Marlina is about to prepare it for him when one of the men shouts at him for trying to eat ahead. He orders Franz to leave and come back tomorrow instead. Being the newbie of the group, Franz complies. If only Franz had a taste of her soup at this moment, then perhaps things would be easier for Marlina. Finally, it's time for dinner. Marlina has prepared several plates for the men, and she serves them chicken soup. Every one of them enjoys the food, and they even compliment Marlina's cooking. This is almost like a special meal for dead men walking, only that they're all blissfully unaware that Marlina has a proverbial noose around their necks. Now, all Marlina has to do next is wait, and soon, all 4 men are lying down on the ground. Only Marcus is left. With the rest of his crew lying dead in the living room, Marlina brings a plate of the poisoned soup directly to Marcus, who's still taking a nap in her room. However, Marcus can no longer contain his vile urges, and he ends up dumping the food. He then forces himself on Marlina and starts moving on top of her. When Marlina tries to resist, Marcus hits her in the face. Fortunately, she spots Marcus's machete on the bedside table and sees it as a way to free herself, all while the perverted Marcus is convinced that Marlina secretly likes what he's doing. While pretending to enjoy what Marcus is doing, she skillfully motions herself so that she's on top of him. At the same time, she grabs the machete and hides it behind her. After unsheathing the blade, she swings it at Marcus, making the perfect cut to behead him. Afterward, Marlina takes Marcus's instrument and burns it. With everything that happened, Marlina is still in shock, and she sorrowfully leans on her husband's corpse in an attempt to find comfort. Once again, Marlina stands victorious over the men that underestimate her. She goes to embrace the only man in her life that made her feel safe. She laments his loss as her poor, tradition-bound world caves in around her. But his presence there is also a reminder that the world can still be as beautiful as it is cruel. Act 2, The Journey. Marlina walks the long and winding road with Marcus's head dangling from a piece of cloth. Marlina soon meets her friend, Novi. Strangely enough, Novi isn't as shocked as she ought to be when she sees the dangling head. Heavily pregnant, Novi goes on and on about her issues at home. She also explains that she's trying to find her husband, who she fears might be late for their baby's due date. In turn, Marlena tells Novi that she intends to take the head to the police. Finally, the public service truck stops by, and Marlena tries to get on, but the driver refuses for fear of getting in trouble. In response, Marlena takes out her blade and forces the driver to take her. Upon seeing this, the rest of the passengers leave the truck, not wanting to get caught up in anything. Left with no other choice, the driver takes Marlena and Novi to the city. The public service truck now boasts quite an array of passengers, the heavily pregnant Novi, the vengeful widow Marlena, and a terrified bus driver just trying to do his job. Amidst the bleakness, the group almost has the makings of a comedic ragtag. Eventually, the odd group happens upon an elderly woman who stopped right in front of the truck. Despite the driver's warnings, she still gets on. The woman explains that she's in a hurry to get 2 horses to her nephew, who will use them for a dowry. The woman cares little upon seeing Marlena with the blade against the driver's throat and eventually boards the truck along with the 2 horses. With her is another young man tending to the animals. The recent addition to their motley crew starts exchanging stories with Novi despite the oddity of it all. Then, the elderly woman notices that Marlena's getting tired of holding her hand up, so she invites her to the passenger car, assuring her that the driver won't leave. When Marlena enters the passenger car, the errand boy, Ian, asks why she was carrying the severed head. Marlena replies that the head is her prisoner. This reflects Marlena's fierce nature. Instead of feeling defeated by what was done to her, she carries the head of her assailant as if to prove to the world and herself that she yielded neither her body nor her soul to this monster that she had conquered. On their journey, a truck drives past them with 2 gruff men sitting in front. Marlena sees the truck from afar, and there, she spots Franz. She successfully hides from Franz's gaze, and they're able to pass by safely. Franz and his companion go straight towards Marlena's hut, where they find the bodies of their dead companions. The 2 men hurriedly go on their way to hunt down Marlena. This leaves a strong, foreboding feeling that the showdown between Franz and Marlena is inevitable. It is no longer a question of if but rather when. Meanwhile, Marlena and Novi stop by the side of the road to urinate. Novi goes on and on about her pregnancy experiences while Marlena envisions Marcus's headless body playing his little instrument. Here, Novi asks Marlena about the truth, and Marlena explains that she was violated and that she killed the men. Confused, Novi asks why she would report the men in the first place. After all, Marlena will only be incarcerated for a murder she can't defend in court. Novi then invites Marlena to stay with her to keep safe, but she declines. Just then, the 2 gruff men drive up to Marlena's truck. They pull out their machetes and demand the passengers to reveal Marlena. Novi walks up to them and sends the men in the wrong direction. The men then order all of the passengers to board the truck, and they drive off. With them gone, Marlena spots a horse. She goes to ride it while continually being haunted by the headless Marcus. Undeterred, Marlena takes on a distinct and familiar image and makes it her own. In an almost cowboy-like fashion, Marlena rides onto the horizon as Indonesia's version of a folk hero. Act 3, The Confession. The nearest police station is situated in the middle of a humble village with only a handful of inhabitants. Before arriving there, Marlena finds a box that she could conceal the severed head with. She hitches her horse to a tree, then brings the box with her to a nearby shack that's serving food. With Marlena sat there, a little girl approaches her, asking if she wants to order a plate of their famous satay. Marlena takes a liking to the girl who introduces herself as Topan. Upon hearing the name, Marlena's heart softened as she explains that she was to have a son named Topan, but she lost him to a miscarriage. In turn, Topan shares that she was given a boy's name in hopes that she'd be as strong as one. Smiling, Marlena orders a plate of satay, and she has her lunch while Topan accompanies her. Though Marlena's there for a sordid reason, she is afforded a small moment of tranquility with an innocent little girl. After eating, Marlena leaves the box with the severed head in Topan's care, instructing her not to open it. Marlena then heads to the police station, where she finds the police wasting their time away on table tennis. It takes a while before anyone attends to Marlena because of their table tennis game, but eventually, a policeman takes her report. She hesitates on whether she should tell the whole truth, but she decides against it. The policeman tells Marlena it will take 2 to 3 days for them to inspect her house, and it will take a month to have a special checkup with her defilement case. Either way, the police will need evidence for any action to be taken. Without a doubt, Marlena is surrounded by insufficient systems and incompetent enforcers of said systems. This is partly the result of being in a rural area, partly due to economic scarcity, but mainly, it reflects how the men in Marlena's life are incompetent and downright apathetic to the issues women face. Realizing that the law won't help her, Marlena returns to the food shack with tears in her eyes. Topan comes by with the box and embraces Marlena, comforting her and telling her not to cry. The kind Topan has Marlena stay in her home for that evening. The 2 grow close with one another, and Topan tells Marlena that her mother must have been as pretty as she was, hinting that she's an orphan. The following morning, Topan is still asleep when Marlena leaves on her horse, and she brings Marcus's head with her. She then picks up her phone to call Novi. The character of Topan reminds Marlena of what she fights for. Marlena would be sure to serve as an inspiration to the young Topan, who strives to be strong in a harsh world. Act 4, Birth. Back to Novi's group, the truck driver had been killed by the 2 bandits. The other bandit, Nico, starts shoveling dirt a yard away from the rest of the group. As for Franz, he's guarding Novi, the elderly woman, and Ian. While they're waiting, a scared Novi receives a call from her husband, Ombu. Novi tries to talk to him, but Franz hijacks the call, pretending to be Novi's lover. This angers Novi, and Ian takes advantage of the commotion to overpower Franz. With Franz knocked down, Novi and the rest of the party board the truck, leaving Franz and Nico behind. Furious, Nico punches Franz a couple of times. He then leaves, deciding to quit their operation after having failed more than once. Later, Ian and the woman drop Novi off at her meeting place with Ombu. After they part ways, the husband and wife are reunited. However, Ombu is furious at the phone call he received earlier, and he accuses Novi of having a breech baby. To elaborate on this further, a breech baby is the term used when the fetus is positioned feet first instead of the usual head first position. In traditional Indonesian culture and superstition, it's considered a sign of infidelity to have one. This leads to Ombu pushing and hitting Novi several times before leaving her in the middle of nowhere. Unbeknownst to her, Franz has been watching everything from up a small hill. He then approaches Novi and takes her hostage. Since he still has Novi's phone from earlier, he demands that she speak with Marlena. Novi takes the ringing phone to tell Marlena that Franz has her before Franz takes the phone, ordering Marlena to meet them at her house. The stage is set for the final showdown. Poetically, Franz decides to end everything where it all began, in Marlena's home. Franz and Novi arrive there first. The moment Novi steps down from Franz's motorbike, her water breaks and she's suddenly going into labor. But the poor Novi is left to take some of Marlena's clothes and put them on. Franz and Novi then settle down at Marlena's house while waiting for her arrival. When Franz isn't looking, she makes preparations for the upcoming standoff. Novi retrieves one of the dead man's machetes, then hides it away in the kitchen. While there, she finds some of the poisonous fruits still left over. Meanwhile, Franz takes Marcus's headless body and positions it in the living room. Now, there are two corpses in Marlena's living room. This is done deliberately to show the opposite faces of men in Marlena's life. On one side is the loving husband that she lost too early, and on the other is her cruel and heartless violator. After dark, Marlena finally arrives, and she finds Novi and Franz waiting for her. Marlena returns Marcus's head, then surrenders her weapon to Franz. In turn, Franz takes the machete before placing Marcus's head on top of his body. Novi and Marlena attempt to leave, but Franz orders the two of them to stay. He has Novi cook him dinner in the kitchen while Marlena stays with him. Novi goes inside the kitchen, trying to cook a batch of poisoned chicken soup, but she faces extreme difficulty in doing so as she is about to have her baby. While Novi is boiling the water, she hears Marlena crying for help in the other room. Novi takes the machete that she stashed earlier and barges into Marlena's room, where she finds Franz lying on top of her. Novi swings down the machete on Franz's neck, severely injuring him. Marlena manages to slide away from underneath him, and she holds him down for Novi to deliver the final blow. In the end, Franz is beheaded the same way Marcus was. Now that everything's over, the heavily pregnant Novi howls in pain as she slumps down the floor. Marlena immediately assists her, and fortunately, Novi manages to deliver the baby successfully. The two women laugh and embrace one another, knowing that in the end, the two of them prevailed in the cruel world of men. Marlena the Murderer in 4 Acts is a beautifully executed revenge film of epic proportions that achieves mythical levels with its eponymous heroine, Marlena. She plows through a violent and rigid world which easily turns her into a folk legend. This powerful, feminist-themed tale shows us that Marlena prevails in a society that continually tries to bring her down. Many critics have affectionately nicknamed this film a satire western. This is a reference to Italian director, Sergio Leone, and his Wild West cowboy films, which were dubbed spaghetti western. But instead of cowboy hats, pistols, and dingy desert towns, Marlena navigates through a world of grassy rural areas, dominated by cruel-hearted men who take what they want, whenever they want. They're in over their heads if they think they can outwit and outplay the machete-wielding Marlena, who stands as a symbol that women will not go quietly if you decide to cross them. One of the interesting details in the film is the young girl Topan. Topan is an orphan who was given a boy's name by her mother in hopes that she would grow strong. It's a small detail, but it speaks a lot about how the unnamed mother also faced struggles with men in their society, giving her daughter some sort of hope that she would one day be able to defend herself from ill-intentioned men. Topan's mother is proven wrong by Marlena, who shows the little Topan that you don't need to become a man to be strong and that women are already powerful as they are. Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.